We greet you, of course, with the holy names of God, and as usual, with the eternal culture of love and devotion. Today, I want to speak on a rather difficult topic, and it's not something that I usually say. And I want to, normally when I speak mostly directly to the audience. An honest speaker should always let you know what he or she is doing. This discourse today is going to be a little different. Inasmuch as that I'm speaking directly to you, but actually I want to speak on a topic that and use you as a catalyst to address a national and international audience. Since that is the nature of my work and especially the nature of this topic. And it's difficult because it's something that we think about every day, most people, especially on this state of evolution. It is something that is spoken about so much that sometimes we don't want to hear about it, but we just want to engage in the performance. I'm talking about sex. And I hope by the time you leave here in the next 45 minutes or so, that you will distinctly carry with you a sense of empowerment. Because there are so many ways to address this topic. There is nothing as powerful in terms of a force that can build up civilizations. There's few things that can bring down civilizations than the use or misuse of the sex energies. It's one of the things that people engage in, hear about, talk about, read about all the time. But there are so many surreptitious, profound aspects. Many people today have literally lost their professions, have stagnant relationships, or have lost relationships that could be very functional. Many companies are falling apart. Many religious, spiritual institutions have already fallen apart or about to fall apart. Millions and tens of millions of people have lost their lives, particularly due to leaders who misused sexual energy in very variegated ways. So I want to address this topic because there's a serious crisis in leadership all over the global community. And in some areas, it is directly, in some places indirectly, due to a lack of cognizance of certain subtle powers. So I hope that as we discuss this very sensitive area, that you will look at it in terms of your own life, your own family, company, organization, and group, race, tribe, and also as we look at modernity, present day civilization. So I'd like to start off first by just reading one or two paragraphs from our leadership book to sort of kick us off with this discussion. I have one chapter called Harnessing Sexual Energies for World Peace. In these perilous times, the issue of human survival on this planet has come into serious question, and the attainment of world peace has become a number one priority. In view of this situation, the global community has come to understand that a sustainable, peaceful world order depends upon improvements in the international, political, social, economic relationships. However, these global improvements cannot occur without better interpersonal relationships within families and between individuals. As a matter of fact, individuals need to find peace within themselves first, which primarily comes from properly controlling and regulating the sexual energies. If human sexual energies remain unharnessed, unintegrated, and unappreciated, personal or planetary peace and stability will continue to elude everyone's grasp. Maybe I'll read one other paragraph along with this. The family unit is the microcosm of the family of nations. When people create harmonious relationships within their families, they automatically improve community, nation, and international cooperation. Global peace is in its current precarious state because of a lack of harmony within the family, which can be largely attributed to the pursuit of lust and self-satisfaction instead of authentic love. Sexual energy is an extremely powerful force. Properly channeled, it is an expression of love. Misdirected, it becomes a vicious agent of destruction that manifests in negative, abusive ways. Poorly harnessed sexual energy can literally enslave an individual, a family, and even a nation, stimulating people to act irresponsibly and violently, ultimately endangering the planet. On the other hand, listen closely, properly regulated sexual energies can become part of the universal love force that fosters selflessness and compassion. Truly, everyone needs to learn to make genuine love and not war. So this is one or two introductory paragraphs from this particular section of the book. Now, if we look at every species, we see how powerful the sexual exchanges are. For instance, some species, the sex act itself is so profound within that species' existence that it only has one chance. The ant, the spider, the butterfly. Butterfly has sex once. The male is finished. Female can lay hundreds of eggs and then it's finished. That's it for its existence. The ants once. The spider, certain spiders once. And so here, even in these species, that this act of union is so much an integral part of life that it even ends the life, and then one must enter into another chapter, take another form, another existence. We see that sometimes some of the greatest creations, some of the greatest discoveries, some of the greatest expressions of art have come from accessing sex energies. And sometimes we see the most vicious inhumanities to humankind have been associated with misuse, exploitation of such. And so I speak these points today because there is a crisis going on now, and I want to help many of you to be able to become more empowered with something that's so accessible. It's an ongoing part of you. And many of those later who hear this, watch this video, hear this tape in the international arena, so that it will save people from losing their professions. It will save people from being dethroned from their positions of royalty. It will save people from being abusive and manipulative and exploitive to, in some cases, millions of people of project citizens that they will be responsible for. Because these are very serious times. And these are times whether you either you put up and you maintain and you grow and grow and grow, or you gradually get deflated, become stagnant, and you will retire at best. And in many cases, many leaders will retire in an infamous mood. Some time back, I was sharing with you many years ago a meeting that I had with the previous president of Zambia, President Kaunda. And so there were many aspects to the discussion. It was a banquet, something like here, a room similar to what we have here. And I was meeting with most of the members of his central committee. And we were having a vegetarian lunch. President Kaunda's vegetarian. And at some point, because most of his inner circle were Marxists, and as they saw how much the president was drawn in to what I was saying and how much we were connecting in so many ways, and the young, we say somewhat upstarts, became very disturbed. And one or two began to speak because their backgrounds, they were communist. And so they began to speak, and I really appreciated what they said, even though it was most unfortunate. They began to explain all this religious stuff, Christianity, Islam, Hindu, Buddhism, etc., etc. So much people have come, missionaries have come, and they speak something. Wow, they take so much. And they give the trite statement you've heard many times, how they came and brought the Bible in one hand and took the land away in the other hand. So they had a genuine concern. How do we know that this is not also your game? I was there talking about alternative schools and farms, and there was some big problems with drugs and other things that we were discussing about these concerns about nation building from a humanitarian and spiritual perspective. And then they began to explain, and on top of that, how do we know that you are not the CIA? At that time, let us say we were not quite aware, as most people, even here in America, are not been quite aware of some of the dealings of FBI and CIA. That was, I guess, over 12, 14 years ago. And so many things have happened. Global community, giving more emphasis, understanding about such. Of course, then I kind of wondered why they're bringing up this. But the point was, how do we know that you walk your talk? How can we really understand that you are really for the people? So for me to be in hot spots, hot positions, it's a day-to-day affair, so it's no problem in trying to deal with it. But because I wanted to communicate and I understood these men are asking a genuine question because they are concerned, but they're not realizing how much they are so hypocritical themselves. And because I studied the country very deeply before moving in and out of the country, I realized that there was a big, big problem with drugs. And I realized that maybe 70% of the men who were talking to me were some of the main persons responsible for what was going on. And so I began to explain, you were talking revolution. You were talking being concerned about the masses and about the people. You were talking about elevating and raising consciousness, while everything basically about your lifestyle is reformist. Most things about your lifestyle is degrading and debilitating to yourself, and you're radiating, emanating that to the people. You're talking about caring for the people. No one can be a proper caretaker. No one can be a proper leader who is not disciplined. Wherever there is a weakness, lack of sense control, that becomes a primary area for adverse factors to capitalize on. And that is why right now, it's been going on for generations and generations. Sex is one of the major ingredients, even amongst international circles, even amongst diplomats, even amongst your government here, that's used for diplomacy, for mind control, and for carrying messages and all kinds of things. It's all part of a package. If little guys do it, if little girls do it, don't think the big guys don't do it even more effectively. And they have so many tools to be able to engage in their particular games. And so I began to explain, so you are chain smokers. You are eating abominable things. You are having sex with almost anything that moves. And you're talking about being concerned about the people who you are day to day exploiting directly and indirectly. Your examples are showing, guiding them toward devastation. So begin to explain about the importance of sense control and how an actual leader or a genuine spiritualist is a greater revolutionist because he or she has committed themselves so much to wanting to be concerned about the people that they are somewhat denying some of their own immediate pleasures for a higher scheme of activity that will benefit the masses. So, this kind of discussion that we're having with this particular leader is something that we can also apply to ourselves, apply to our environments. This was a discussion with President Clinton, I guess, about 14 years ago. But the theme is just as fresh today as it was then. So as we build upon this topic, we're looking at harnessing world peace, developing world peace, inner peace, collective, aggregate peace, from the science of controlling, directing, and cultivating the sexual energies. We're talking about saving relationships, families falling apart due to incest, due to promiscuousness, companies being so stagnant that can do many, many times more and be producing so much in the global communities. But because of so many hang-ups with misuse and abuse, the sexual energies. We're talking about leaders who have literally practically sold away their citizens due to the lack of control, lack of discipline. I want to read one more part from this chapter, and then I want to dive into a lot of psychological, sociological, metaphysical, and most important, spiritual considerations about one of the greatest powers that we have within us and within the universe. Leaders who are genuinely interested in world peace should seek inner peace first by controlling the senses, regulating the sexual energy, and refusing to perceive others as mere sex objects. To be a leader means not to be a slave to passions or senses. You will not be in harmony with your soul if you do not master the temptations of the material world. Because the soul, being of a higher, subtle, divine quality, cannot express itself unless one's mind and body are aligned with one's truer, higher nature. We want to tune in very quickly, but not too fast where it's an overload, to certain sociological, psychological aspects of misuse and abuse. First, in many civilizations, we have the model, the patriarchal model, the autocratic model. We have the model where women, children are normally the consideration by the masculine gender is to lord over what one is surveying. And so sometimes there is the ambiguity from being the dominant overseer, protector, provider on one side, and being the ruthless, self-centered autocrat, exploiter, manipulator. So this particular theme, whether it's in the African continent, Eastern world, whether it's in the Western world, is a problem. And it's so much a problem because when people men do not have a wholesome mood about themselves, then as they interact in the environments, then of course the children and women will be first to experience the negative aspect of that lack of integration. And it is not just men those in a male body, but there is a rise, like anything, of women also exploiting, especially in the lesbian category, of women also exploiting other women. There is the mood of when one is in a position of seniority, that if there is not the basic ingredient of love, of compassion, it will inevitably turn into exploitation. There's a phenomenon known as transference. You know, there's some states now that have special laws in dealing with therapists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, some of those in the medical professions. Because there is such a rise in practitioners abusing their clients, abusing their patients. And it's not totally their fault. The tendency, part of the human condition, is you want your leader to love you, to protect you, to soothe you. As we're feeling so much lack, lonely, there's so much emptiness, there's such a tendency to have this kind of transference, especially if someone is helping you in some way. There is a natural bond that begins to become engendered. It becomes the duty of the practitioner, whether it's a clergy, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a military leader, etc., to understand what it means to be in positions of power and to be dealing with people's lives, especially at a time when so many people are needy. And most important, to understand the consequences that come when you abuse those who are taking shelter of your particular domain, power, your particular decisions and control. There are serious consequences, and we will talk about that a little later. There is a need to understand more about boundaries. See, in present-day society where we're becoming free of culture, we say in Sanskrit, yata mata tata pata, where everything is transitory, everything is relative. Therefore, whimsical activities, and each person owning their own truth. I have my truth, she has her truth, you have your truth, he has his truth. And at the end of the day, there is no truth, there's only anarchy. So we have our own truths, then there's not a problem for people to abuse and misuse each other based on their own idiosyncratic desires and tendencies. And so this is going on more. And there's less and less healthy boundaries. There must be some psychological space when you are in a leadership position and you're dealing with people. There is a need for being personal, being sensitive, being compassionate. But there's a need to have certain psychological space. Just as when you're dealing with something that's very powerful, something that's very dangerous, you have to do what you have to do, but there is at the same time, there is some healthy paranoia. If you have some expensive diamonds or gold in your possession right now, you are very careful about what you do with your purse, what you do with your suit jacket, because you have that in there. So that's in the background as you do what you have to do. But the converse of that, if you know that you're in the bush, you're in the woods, and there's a snake, poisonous snake is in the area. So you do what you have to do, but there's a certain attentiveness. As you meticulously do what you have to do, there's at the same time there's that variable, there's that boundariness in the consciousness. Therefore, it allows you to execute your work, but at the same time, not to become an embarrassment, not to become a casualty. This list of men, and in a couple of cases women that I read, what they had in common is that they all, to a certain degree, practically destroyed the organization. Some of them caused millions of people to lose their lives. Some of them completely destroyed corporations. Some of them completely put people in such bewilderment, many people even committed suicide. They found out about their deviations. There is also the tendency for leaders to prey on people's weakness. This is to help you because everyone is a leader in one sense or the other, and everyone is dealing with leaders. That you're careful as you deal with people, whether it's in your social group, your educational group, whether it's in your corporation, whether it's in your spiritual, cultural group. Be careful how you deal with people and watch to see how people are dealing with you. Because we're talking about significant aspects about life, about things that can raise consciousness, that can make global mind shifts. So often, when one has had misfortune, divorce, death, or even disease, or found out about disease, some traumatic situation, abrupt situation that happens in one's life. There are those who particularly capitalize off such because you become so vulnerable. And sometimes it's done unconsciously and sometimes consciously. Be careful if you are in that situation, either as the subject or the object. If you are the patient, and if you are administering the guidance, the help, the care, be careful. Because most of the things that we're talking about They do not just consciously happen. Not that people just plan. Some people do, but in most cases, it is so much based on a lack of understanding of the dynamics. And therefore, the problem becomes very, very devastating. We see, particularly here in Washington, that often there is a tendency, even in hiring policies, that when we hire a secretary, we hire a sexatary. We want to know, how available are you for overtime? How much are you available for working on weekends? Do you really see yourself as happily married? And so, because people are so much in need of economic support, so many people have degraded themselves and are doing it every single day. And so many of those who are to be the providers, the protectors, the role models, have so much been responsible for the degradation. Do they realize as they're causing degradation to somebody's mother, to somebody's sister, to somebody's wife, to somebody's future wife, how much they are doing it to themselves and to their own family? How much they are propagating a lifestyle and a consciousness that takes away from so much of what can be used creatively when the sexual energies are properly harnessed. And we then interact with love instead of lust. How much they do not realize how they're even destroying their own corporation, how they're destroying their own constituents. And what to say of spiritual organizations by improper activities. The spiritualists are the worst, because spiritual leadership takes on some special qualities. Just like to be promiscuous, just as to be exploitive sexually, that is one factor. But even worse, to be exploitive to your own son, your own daughter. One of the dangers in the spiritual paradigm is that its greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. The spiritual leaders, just like the cultural leaders in the traditional sense, were to be representatives of the ancestors, representatives of the devas, representatives of God. And therefore they were to be envoys who, by their activities, would bring blessings to the entire community. And as they speak and as they interacted, they were to be empowered to be able to elevate consciousness and to bring mercy wherever that they find themselves. When the cultural or spiritual leader is proper. The king was not just a king who was elected because he was a good businessman and had a lot of money or was good in politics, and therefore he was invited to take coronation. But because he was one who understood the science of caring for the people, the science of communication with higher realms, and understood the dangers in abusiveness and exploitation, and was checked by proper kingmakers, or checked by Brahmins, or checked by priests, who themselves were righteous and would be very sensitive to what was improper, rather than the cheaters and the cheated, and everyone enjoying in the sense gratification. That's what happens now in most political arenas as well as cultural arenas. So when one is taking the position as being a representative of God, one is acting as father. One is acting as an agent that God is coming through. When such a person becomes exploitive, you're talking about post-traumatic stress symptoms that people are having now, because the amount of incest that is going on all over the planet is frightening. The amount of people who are suffering now because of sexual abuse, who cannot have healthy sexual relationships, in some cases for the rest of their lives. People who have terrible migraine headaches, who are wetting their beds, even they're adults, who are constantly in fear, even when they're just touched by someone, just from the back. And in some cases, their lives will never be so-called normal, particularly due to being abused by those who they gave their greatest attention and love and devotion to, and those who they considered would protect them from others who would abuse or misuse them. And this is happening. Most of these leaders I read were spiritual leaders who engaged in deviant activity. And their marks will last, in some cases, for many generations. Now, on a positive note, if we avoid, and we'll come back to that a little later, but if we are looking as being the caretakers of those who we take charge of, then we will not be so quick to claim ownership. When we claim ownership, then we think that whatever we do with what we own is simply our own prerogative. And therefore, if we want to play funny games, we feel justified. But if we see in whatever leadership, whether it's political, social, cultural, or religious, but if the leader sees him or herself as being the coordinator of the services, as the caretaker, is one to be the catalyst, to have the vision, and to bring others into that vision where they feel that vision supports them consistently, then we'll not have such exploitation. When clergy especially, it doesn't matter what tradition, we are speaking in universalities. When clergy do not rejuvenate themselves, when they do not constantly engage in bringing on more inner strength, it is only a matter of time before they become great embarrassments to spiritual evolution in general and to their own particular distinct traditions and societies. You cannot be so locked into people spiritually and think that you can go on and on and on without rejuvenating yourselves. So many powerful psychic contacts take place when people see you as a source of their strength, a source of their happiness, a source of their protection, a source of their guidance. So much of their consciousness goes into your consciousness. And if you're not picking yourself up, after a while, all of those conscious needs, demands, dependence begin to circle around you, vibrate through you, throughout all of your pores. And instead of you being a helper, you simply begin to think that you are the owner. After all, it's all in you, coming from you, going back to you. And you begin to become the greatest disturbance to human and spiritual progress. Because the spiritual leaders, if properly aligned, can make a serious difference. Like in some traditions, there's even various types of initiations where there are vows and there are pledges and there are allegiances that are established. Even more so, some of you enter into them and some of them, the subjects enter into you. It's not just a matter of the spiritual, even in your families. You were parents. You obviously, physically, physiologically, psychologically, metaphysically, and spiritually, your siblings are entering into you and you into them. So many ways, more than we may immediately understand. And therefore, if you are constantly receiving such, and you're not developing inner strength, then after a while, you'll simply become drained, become a pretender, yourself become lonely, will become empty, become drained, and what happens? In everyone's basic consciousness at this point of evolution in general, soon as you are depressed, soon as you are disturbed, soon as you're in anxiety, first thing that comes into consciousness, it can be resolved through sex. And we're in no way trying to bring down sex. We're trying to bring sex up to levels where it is a tremendous service to God. It is a service to the planet. What is for tremendous realization and revelation. And where we no longer see love as sex. Civilization, especially the so-called advanced world, has relegated sex to love. And so no wonder we see that every minute in America now, someone is being raped. That 1/6 of all children, girls as well as boys, have been abused, incest arrangements. And that is increasing phenomenally. When we are being harassed by every single commodity, doesn't matter whether it's a candy bar, whether it's a car, whether it's a condominium, the idea is take this, enjoy this, and you can increase your sex life. Because the agents of control have so much produced an environment where they can get almost anything they want out of you by simply stimulating your interests and your potential as well as your actions in sex life. And so there are many ways to enslave civilizations, many ways to enslave people. Something that is very powerful. When it is not used properly, then it becomes very powerful in the other polarity. And so something that is so powerful that brings about creation. How amazing it is when a man and woman come together and there is genuine love and what they are able to produce, what they're able to create. What an amazing miracle. So now, majority of people on this planet do not even know how to experience real heart-to-heart love. And very few people on the planet even know how to have sex. Even though they're reading everything about sex, watching everything about sex. It's proof they don't know how to have sex. When you have sex, what you have to have with so many people. If you have been able to have deep sexual relationships, deep connections, you will not have to go so many places with a man one day, a woman another day, a beast another day, and your own child another week. People do not know how to experience real connections. Therefore, they're feeling so empty. They're trying so many ways to acquire that is natural. But now we're being bombarded so unnaturally. And therefore, we're creating something like what was happening during the gladiators' time, where we are enjoying ourselves to death by not having genuine enjoyment, but seeking for what is there, but we're missing. Pornography is becoming one of the greatest growth industries. What does pornography do? First, pornography is so connected with organized crime. Pornography increases rapes. Pornography causes less and less for people to be able to have healthy relationships. It breaks up families. It breaks up connections. Pornography, soft porn, leads into hard porn. People begin to so much act upon what they see in such perversions. They begin to justify all kinds of things because of what they have seen. And this is increasing. I'm afraid I'm talking about some controversial subjects because that is an expression of love. When you love someone, you want to talk about things that are very important that can affect the life of those you care for. When you just want to use people, name and fame and adoration and distinction. When you want followers, and when you are deviant, you have deviant people around you, and you turn your eyes, you turn your ears. So there's a problem with ethics. There's a problem with teachings in sexuality, because who is teaching? So many deviants themselves are doing the teaching. Therefore, who will take it serious? When we look at the socially transmitted diseases, and then we want to move into another level of metaphysics, of spirituality, things that you don't normally hear about. We're going to express things to you today that you normally will not hear about. Most people on the planet will not hear about. Therefore, we will speak these things so that it begins to circulate in certain important circles at this particular time. First, we see the sociological factors happening with sexually transmitted diseases. The World Health Organization says that each year, over 4 million cases of syphilis, 25 million cases of gonorrhea. Every day, additional 5,000 people are affected with AIDS. In the next 4 to 5 years, 40 million people, at least worldwide. So this is telling us something. Because the planet itself is alive, and the things that are happening on the planet is so much also due to various karmic factors about how we treat, use, or misuse various things that have been arranged for us to be able to live and to associate with. You do unnatural things, you get unnatural reactions. Now there is an increase in homosexuality. And I'm not no homophobic. As a matter of fact, everyone is looking for love. But why is there such an increase? First, we see sociologically that so many people are being brought up in environments where what they see as a man, they do not want to be a part of that. If I love my mother and I see my father doesn't give a damn, when he hasn't been there for her, he hasn't been there for me, he hasn't been there for my sister, for my brother, am I going to be proud to be a so-called man? When I see my mother crying, and I look in the refrigerator and realize there's no food, I know that some man has been responsible, could have made a change. Am I going to be enthused about being such? In so many cases, no. So many young girls being so abused and so mistreated just because they wear skirts and have long hair. Just because they are the mothers or will be future mothers. How much this chauvinistic environment tells a young lady it is not prosperous to be a young lady. So many challenges, unnecessary, superfluous challenges you have to deal with just because you are a young lady. As you walk down the street, practically any place, in any environment, you have to be careful just because you are a young lady. You have to be careful to even greeting and smiling at somebody because they may take it the wrong way. You have to be careful when your boss makes a certain comment to you because he may be meaning something else. Constantly having a paranoid. How much is one going to feel happy about being such? Many will not. Will make a change. When they work very hard and they see they get paid less, and somebody gets paid more just because he wears a pair of pants every day. And we're going to tell that young girl to be very happy about feminine gender. It's no wonder, sociologically. Metaphysically, when people are not properly integrated, then in their next life, what can happen is you can have a male consciousness in a female body. You have a male body and a female consciousness. Like such souls are locked up, they're stuck. It's not just that it's their fault. And I'm not chastising or condoning, just trying to identify. Because we've all created that environment. We're all part of what creates culture, what creates civilization. And so in many cases, as one has been so imbalanced on one side in one life, so preoccupied in one way, in the next life some of those patterns will be there and it will create a certain type of lifestyle. My time is going a little short, so I'm going to move to some other metaphysical areas, and with hopes that at some later time we'll be able to dive in deeper in some of these subjects. Listen close. Distinction, pursuits for adoration, and self-centered profits are often expressions of subtle sex. Anyone who is too much trying to be distinctive has an imbalance in sexual energies. And that will later grade into physical operative activities. In other words, as it is a part of the conscious, part of the mindset, it will begin to manifest in exploitation. Because my distinction, my glories, my adoration, my profits, my esteem means my sovereign pleasures. Fulfillment of my idiosyncratic appetites. Therefore, I will see others as simply an extension for my gratification. So when you see powerful leaders, spiritual, cultural, political, etc., and they're so much captured by distinction, there is no question what is going on behind closed doors. Because they will not be able to refrain, to be disciplined. Because already they're out of order. The opposite of that, of course, is that strength is no problem, but there must be selflessness, humility with strength. Therefore, this list of leaders that I've read and list of personalities, and I didn't want to single out any person. It's not about that. It's bigger than any person. But we're talking about universalities, things that are about individual and collective consciousness, laws that are subtle, concerns, things that are happening to us that we may not always be sensitive to. It is so hard these days for someone to try to control sexual appetites. One of the main reasons is television. It is practically impossible to watch a few hours of TV and not to become sexually stimulated. Even if you're just watching a ball game, Every time there's an advertisement, it tells you it's not about the ball game, it's about your genital. And now the movies that are selling has violence and lots of sex. And it wouldn't be a problem if it was some healthy relationship. But it's about the intrigue of exploitation and abuse. Now it's becoming more and more about the exploitation of even perversion. And people will spend amazing amount of money in getting special videos and paying for cable. They will sacrifice their vitamins. They'll sacrifice something essential to their health just to contaminate themselves by the cable. And what do they think their children are doing when they have a chance to turn it on? And then when they start acting in certain ways. TV. Listen now. When you watch, many times we've explained how it puts you in an alpha state. You're 25% more receptive. But as you watch television, it implants images into your mind. And those images can stay with you for days, for weeks, for months. Think about it. Think about the last time you saw a heavy sex scene. And think about how long it stayed in your consciousness. And then you're going to go about, and you're not supposed to be promiscuous. And you have this radar constantly shouting out to you about the experience. It is very difficult. And it is no accident. There are people who are consciously arranging to harness majority of people on this planet through sex and through drugs. Often we share with you that the drug business, illicit and pharmaceutical business, is the number one business in the entire world. That is not an accident. And you're finding more and more information about that recently as you tune in to what's happening on an international level with crime, exploitation, and drugs. It is no accident about the subliminal effects in advertisement to stimulate you sexually. It is no accident that some very highly paid psychiatrists and specialists are used to do certain things to create certain images that affects you. It is not an accident. It's a part of a massive plan of degradation. And people will be consciously and unconsciously affected by it unless they're able to have more compassion, unless they're able to be more selfless, unless they're able to realize the great power in harnessing and using the sexual energies in a real caring and loving sense. Now, these last few things we're going to mention, I have to move a little quick. Our time is up. You see, I'm just touching the iceberg. I'm just touching the surface of it. Try to understand this. As we appreciate the science of reincarnation, it means we've all lived many lifetimes. We've all been sexing for many lifetimes. And sometimes in this life, you meet up with a sex partner from a previous life. The subtle connection is there. And sometimes, without your conscious knowing, there's an overwhelming desire to unite. There's an overwhelming agitation, overwhelming stimulation, overwhelming absorption. Because you have shared so much from the past. But now that person may be your best friend's wife or husband. That person may be your own son or daughter. Understand how difficult this thing is. Why people are being so much pulled in so many ways, unconsciously as well as consciously. By the fads, by the entertainment, by the social and cultural factors, and by metaphysical factors. So one has to have some understanding. If there's some principle-centeredness, even though the pulls are there, do not act upon them. Otherwise, it is already a looseness, then what will be the hope? This is a difficult one. Let me hope I can explain it without bringing confusion. Now there are about 60 million abortions or so every year worldwide. What do you think those souls are going to? What do you think is happening to those souls? Someone says, okay, but come on now. Come on, Swami, don't get into that one now. You're talking about oppression, now let's talk about freedom, and women should have freedom of choice. Of course, the living entity should also have the freedom, should have the choice. We know that in just 3 weeks you can detect the brain waves. In 7 weeks you can detect, 3 weeks you detect the heartbeat. 7 weeks you can detect the brain waves. You can transfer one fetus from one woman to another and it can still be alive. So life is there. Chromosomes are there in just a short time. Everything that's going to constitute the color of the hair, the color of the eyes, the race, that is already there. So it's not just a tissue, is it? But now look at what is happening. So many entities are trying to take birth. And they're being told, not in this chamber. Get out. You must go by force. So there are so many souls who are waiting, wanting to have physical bodies to be able to go on with their evolution. You understand? As there are so many souls waiting, and especially most people's consciousness is not very advanced, and so they have brought, see, when you have sex, I'm going to try to end in about 5 minutes or so. When you have sex, the conscience of the man and the woman aggregates and it draws in a particular being to associate with that level of consciousness. Now people having sex, they don't want the baby. It's an accident if it comes. They're in intoxication with somebody else's wife or husband in dark environments. They're doing the complete opposite. They're having the involvement without responsibility, without wanting responsibility. All of that affects the kind of soul that comes into that environment. Are you hearing me? A soul comes who wasn't wanted, who was produced simply out of lust, who neither parties in some cases want any sense of commitment. And somebody is coming, is being brought into the world by an accident. What kind of soul is going to be drawn to such an environment? Even when they do, they're not aborted. No wonder so many of the children now are such violent mentality. It was not love that brought them, it was violence that brought them, and therefore their first connection is through violence, degradation, frustration, and anxiety, gloom. Now the opposite of that is that when people really care about each other, do not just see somebody as a sex machine for their enjoyment, of not just involving themselves for the moment. It's not involved in doing things that are unnatural, that produce unnatural circumstances. See, when healthy people come together, they produce a natural consequence, and therefore the natural thing produces something which is natural. Same-sex people can't produce what naturally can come out of that union. And therefore, it's unnatural. As we said, in many cases, it's not just their immediate fault for that lifetime, but it's unnatural. So, So many souls in general are needing bodies. And especially, and I'm saying this to many of the spiritual leaders, listen, especially those souls who want a higher body. That means they have to be able to come into a connection where there is a man and a woman of higher consciousness. You understand? That soul doesn't care whether you made vows, whether you're married, whether you're celibate. That soul wants a body. So many bodies are not available, and those are available are lower nature. That soul of a higher quality would not be satisfied. And therefore, when it sees a man and a woman that can produce a kind of a body that would allow a higher existence based on that quality of that soul, there will be some stimulation. As those life forces will then begin to agitate because they're thinking, if these two genitals come together, it will produce a certain kind of body that will complement what is needed for my particular evolution. You understand what I'm saying? I'm saying that also some of the sex agitation is due to living entities that want to take birth. I'm also saying that spiritual leaders will normally feel more sexual agitation than others. And if they do not understand it, they will keep falling and falling and falling. And they will engage in incest. And will destroy the organization sometimes. Destroy the faith of so many people. Squander millions and millions in assets. To understand that that is there and it is natural. But it must be channeled in such ways. The living entity that wants birth, it doesn't care if you're a nun, if you're a monk, if you're a priest. It doesn't even care if it's your brother or your uncle or your sister. If they have a high spiritual quality in evolution, it sees that the coming together of those two is going to produce a certain kind of body that it wants. Therefore, when you're in that association, you will feel so much sexual stimulation, and one will act upon that if one is not careful. So I'm going to end with just two more. I'm actually just getting started, but I have to stop. We have a limited time here. So living entities want bodies. The other level, and maybe I'll stop here so I can have at least 5 to 10 minutes for questions, or 5 minutes if I have time. Let's hope I'm not overloading you. There is also a very special case. This is high level, and as I said, I'm speaking not only for you here, because anytime I speak, it is audio tape, it is videotape, it is transcribed, and it goes many places around the world. And I see many, many leaders in tremendous precarious situations and about to fall, and many leaders who are tremendously fallen and need to reclaim themselves. There are some special cases where someone has evolved in a very fantastic way in this life or previous lives. And their next life will endow them with a very high post, sort of like a lord, or will endow them. See, I don't want to get too metaphysical, too far esoteric. But just as there are senators and congressmen and senators and there are presidents and cabinet members and different personalities having different levels of jurisdiction, there are also beings who oversee different planets, who oversee different universes. Everything is alive and everything is personal. And there are beings that oversee many universes. And I don't think that is such a far-out thing, because even your body is a universe. And within your body are so many living entities. And you are the dominant person, your dominant living force that's overseeing that particular universe within your own body. So sometimes, it's like with the rich and super rich, they're very envious of each other. Sometimes they sabotage each other. So sometimes some entity who is having a particular post is noticing that someone's austerity, knowledge, understanding, renunciation, and purity is of such a level that they will be able to have that post in the future. And some of those who may be occupying such posts will say, not if we can make a difference. And they will do various things to try to bring the person down. I mean, just as you have angels and archangels and nymphs and fairies, they are also psychic prostitutes, heavenly prostitutes, men and women. Just as you have here in Washington, you have so many prostitutes, call girls, you have and call boys, huh? And the boys charge you, you pay more for the boys than you do for the girls, right here in Washington. That's what I've heard. So, just as what happens in some of the lower realms happens sometimes on the higher realms, but more effective, more power, more influence. And so sometimes, just as people set each other up, it's like one of the interesting ways of espionage effects is the sexual connection. So many secrets have been given while somebody's under the bed sheets. One of the CIA's great tactics. It's been a tactic in management for years on certain diplomatic levels. So these things also happen in higher circles. And so if one is not properly principle-centered, properly grounded, then surely one will succumb, because this is beyond ordinary type of attacks. Now, I'm going to wrap up here. I threw out a lot of things in a short time. Most of these things you will not read in any book. Most of these things, your minister, your imam, your corporation leader, your CEO has no understanding of. As well as you can understand abuse, and you can check on your own abuse, and you can also deal with trying to help others. But if such is misused, then just as we're saying, there are agents who sin the temptations, there are also agents who send the chastisers. There's always surveillance. Just as when you love someone, you're concerned, and you watch them, and you hear about them, you think about them. God loves us all, and arranges many ways to hear, to watch, and to deal with this. So, in conclusion, we talked about how some of the greatest things is happening in civilization. The most powerful things have been proper use of harnessing the sex energies. Some of the most devastating things have been. We discussed how many, many leaders, political, social, in the business field, etc., have been a great disappointment in such ways. We talked about the patriarchal arrangements that's threatening transference, boundary violations. We talked about pornography, abortions, sexual transmitted diseases. We emphasized some positive things in relationship, that one should be very careful when they're in positions of power. One should be very careful also in positions of power to have friends. Friends can help us with our virtues as well as with our defects. Often when we're not tuning in to a friend association, more chance in leadership that we will also exploit. And most important is that when we have genuine sense of love, compassion, then we will not fall prey to lust and to abuse.